Well, as far as gemology is concerned, a big one in the last number of years has been low temperature heat treatment of corundum. It's not that it hasn't been going on, it's been happening all the time, but there wasn't any way to detect it. And then a few years back, a way to detect it in some stones was discovered. And so now we're capable of detecting it sometimes, mostly in pink sapphires and rubies. So was an issue that we've had to do a lot of research on. But that means that now sometimes some rubies or pink sapphires that would have said no indications of heating on a report, now we can say that they're heated. So that's caused a little bit of an issue within the colored stone trade. The other thing that's always a problem, and it continues to be a problem, is country of origin determinations. It's hard to be consistent with them, although all the laboratories try very hard, and that you might put a lot of time and effort and expense into developing a field gemology program where we actually go to mine locations and collect samples directly from the mine sources to use in our research for country of origin determination. The thing about that is the mines change and new mines are found, and so we're always trying to keep up, with what's coming out of the ground now, so to speak. And then there's also new origin requests from the industry. Like, for instance, right at the moment, there's been a big push for doing country of origin on jadeite jade. So we're working on that. I mean, nobody's actively doing it yet, as far as I know. The reason they're asking for this is because there's more higher quality material coming out of Guatemala now, and they want to be able to separate it from the Burmese material. And so we're currently doing research, and I know others are too, to try and be able to do that. The problem with that, of course, is you have to be thorough. You can't just determine Burma from Guatemala, for example. You have to have other lesser known sources in play, such as Italy, and Russia, and Japan, who all produce this kind of material, although not in nearly the same quantity as Burma and Guatemala. But still, you have to consider them in order to do a service like this. So that's actively being done right at the moment. Another thing that's concerning origins that's been a bit of an issue is blue sapphires that occur in basaltic deposits. The reason why that's an issue is because basaltic deposits originate very deep in the earth. And they can come up to the surface anywhere, regardless of where, the border might be. And so consequently, because they form that way, they're very similar to one another, no matter where they come from. And a lot of times it's really not possible to tell what country they originated in. So because of that, now we've added a term on our reports that in these cases, instead of just saying it's inconclusive, we would say that it's basalt related and then have a description on the report about what that means and why we're saying that. So it's a little bit more information than just saying we can't tell. And then one other issue that's been a problem over the last few years has been the realization that there are some sapphires, particularly yellows, oranges, and padparacha colors, that will fade upon exposure to light. And some of them will fade pretty rapidly. This is a natural phenomenon, although it can be induced by putting a UV light on these stones. And so we've had to develop techniques to find out whether a stone's color is stable under these conditions. We've known about this for yellow sapphires for a long time, but it wasn't until, I'd say, 6 years ago or so, that it was realized that it could affect paparachas too. And so now we test for that, and I've been asked by a number of organizations to try and help clarify it for them so they understand what they need to look for. And so I'm working on that right at the moment to try and make a presentation for trade organizations, to dealers themselves, so they can try and understand it better than they could before. There's not a lot of new treatments, really. They're mostly variations on existing treatments. So in other words, there's only a certain number of treatments that can be done to gem materials. And so, but they find new ways to use them. As an example of that, diffusion treatment, which began with blue sapphires many years ago, where they were able to diffuse the element titanium into the surface of a sapphire and turn it blue. That's where it started. And so subsequent to that, they found they could also diffuse beryllium into sapphires and change their color to yellow or orange or paparachia colors, or even lighten blue colors on very dark stones. So it took quite a while for us to be able to understand what was happening there, because beryllium, being a light element, was not easy to detect. Most chemical analysis equipment that existed at the time could not detect that light of an element. So we had to start using more sophisticated equipment to be able to detect it. So that's where it started, but since then, diffusion's been used in several other materials, such as sunstone and feldspar, and more recently, cobalt in spinel. They now know they can diffuse cobalt into spinel. This became an issue because cobalt spinel, particularly in the very bright colors that it sometimes comes in, became very popular, and it's very rare in those very bright colors. And so the price of it just rose to very high levels. And so consequently, somebody figured out how to diffuse cobalt into spinel to give it that bright color. So we have realized that a number of years ago now, and have come up with ways of detecting that. And now more recently, they found they can diffuse nickel into spinel and turn it green. So just another variation on this diffusion treatment, which is all done in a similar way. It's just a matter of being aware that it exists in other materials. So another one that happened more recently is radiation. Now, radiation's been done on a lot of different gemstones for many years, and a lot of times it's not detectable. Like, for instance, in rubellite, tourmaline, they irradiate it to red, and there's really no way to detect it. So we just acknowledge that this happens, and some of this material is out there. However, not too long ago, they started irradiating rubies, and there's a number of stories about how that happened, allegedly in Sri Lanka. But the problem with that is, what it does is it adds a little orange or yellow to an otherwise purplish ruby. It makes it look more red. The problem with that treatment is the color's not stable. We've known you can irradiate sapphires to yellow for many years, but they fade and go back to the original color. And this is true with these rubies also. They'll go back to their original color in a relatively short period of time. So this is a problem concerning the industry. But of course, you can tell if it's irradiated by just putting it under a strong light for a while. Fade back to its original color. So, treatments have always been about adding value to a stone that otherwise wouldn't have it, to make more material available that without these kind of treatments, it wouldn't be there. Like, for instance, the practice of filling fractures in emeralds, which has happened for many decades. If they didn't do that, then there would be a lot less gem quality emerald available on the market. So they do this, they fill the fractures and should disclose it, of course. And that makes the emeralds, it makes the supply of emeralds that are usable in jewelry a lot better. And this is true with other things too, like heat treatment of sapphires. It's the same thing. It takes sapphires that in the past weren't useful because they were white and cloudy, and it changes their color to blue and clears up the cloudiness and makes them useful. So again, with the necessary step of disclosing that this treatment has been done, it increases the supply of available material to the market. Well, I assume you're talking about terms like pigeon blood and royal blue and pamparacha, which are probably the main ones. The thing about them is that it's very hard to standardize what these terms mean. For example, with pigeon's blood, let's just take that as an example. Where did it come from originally? Well, if you make a quick search of the internet, you'll see some people say it originated in China. Some say it originated in Burma. Some say that it was European traders that started using it. And who knows which one is actually true. Everybody pretty much agrees that it originated somewhere in the 19th century. But then you ask, well, what color is it? And you will get opinions that say, well, it's the color of fresh blood splattered on a silver tray. Pigeon's blood, obviously. Or it's the color of a live pigeon's eye, which, if you've ever looked at one close up, which many have not, it's actually bright red. So the opinions about where it even came from aren't exactly the same. And so it's hard to know where it originally came from and what it originally meant. So because of this, we've had to try and use it, they're trade terms, right? Standardize how we use these kinds of terms amongst certain labs. A lot of major international laboratories have criteria, just as GIA does, about how we apply these terms. There is a group of labs that exists called the LMHC. It stands for Laboratory Manual Harmonization Committee. This is a group of international labs, of which GIA is one, that get together and discuss these kinds of criteria, trying to coordinate what we say on our reports for the betterment of the industry, to try and be consistent. And this color issue, certainly been one that has been discussed, and we have put together some criteria as to what, when these labs say this on a report, this is what we mean. And we publish this material, or this criteria. So this is available to anyone in the trade, and they can use it if they want. We're not a governing body. GIA isn't, the LMHC isn't. We can put these things out there and say, this is what we say. You can use this if you want, but many people don't. They have their own criteria. So because there's a lack of a clear understanding of what these trades must mean or should mean, there's a industry, which isn't good. We all acknowledge that we should try to find a way where the whole industry would use the same kind of criteria, but I'm sure, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of gemological laboratories around the world of various sizes. Many of them are localized in their countries. But even amongst the international laboratories, there isn't always agreement about exactly how it should be applied. One example of that is we can kind of agree on, let's say, Podparacha colors. We can agree on what the basics should be, that it's a combination of orange and pink in a sapphire. It shouldn't have yellow, it shouldn't have purple, it shouldn't have brown in its color, just yellow and orange. It should be a relatively even color. And those are the basic criteria, very basic, that the LMHC has printed that we all agree on. Now, some laboratories take other things into account. Like, for example, some laboratories feel it shouldn't be treated. So heat-treated stones wouldn't get this call in those laboratories. Other labs feel that it's a color call, and whether it's treated or not shouldn't matter. However, we all universally agree that stones that are diffused, like beryllium diffused stones, shouldn't get this kind of call. So even though we can come up on basic definitions, there are still some other criteria that some labs feel should apply, but everyone doesn't. So, I mean, these things are important because they're used as a marketing tool. They're used to try and separate out certain kinds of material from other kinds. And so we try very hard to be consistent about these calls, but I fully admit that the consistency is very difficult throughout the whole industry. We work with trade organizations like CIBJO, with like ICA, the International Colored Stone Association, to try and work on issues like this. So there is a lot of people trying to do it, but again, it's difficult to make the whole industry use the same kind of terms, and that's kind of where the problem is.